So you ask, where does all of the money go? And that's the interesting part, because states and countries are using this money to better the state and country. So in Colorado, much of the tax was used for schools, playgrounds, public works, roads, highways. So the tax revenue isn't going right back into other things, it's coming right back into the state, which is where we see, legislation written correctly from the beginning. So when we're helping draft some of these bills and some of the rules and regulations that govern the program, we do it in a way that kind of pigeonholes the government to give you the patients and the businesses a way to generate goodwill for not only the state, but also for patients. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about suggestions and rulemaking that we tackle every time we start with any type of government and so forth. The first is the paradigm between physician recommendations and the prescriptions and how patients actually get their first recommendation from a physician. And the way that most programs are set up, the physician has to recommend that cannabis will positively affect the patient. So in new markets, it's very difficult for a physician to know anything about, number one, any type of issues that cannabis may have with their current medications. We're seeing huge adverse reactions in mental health patients, exacerbating schizophrenia and so forth, but physicians may not know any of these overlaps. Secondly, a physician is not that likely to write a recommendation for cannabis because it is still a Schedule I narcotic. And their license may be in jeopardy if they recommend this and something comes of it. So what we typically suggest is that the physician just attests that the individual has the condition. That's it. I mean, as your healthcare provider, the state has said these are the conditions and illnesses that allow the patient to enter the program. So what this effectively does is it takes the liability off of the physician and just puts it back on the state, because if the state's saying it's okay, all the physician has to do is attest that they have the condition. So it's difficult to figure out who is or isn't a patient. In Illinois, there was a list of conditions, and then there's battles as to who is or isn't a patient. That's where there's more liability, because who's to say whether you are or aren't a patient? And then and conditions are added, and then there's some friction there. So in states like Maryland, they have a list, but the last clause of the list is any condition that the physician feels is severe enough for the patient to actually access medicine. We're also seeing issues with the patient registry system. So typically what happens is, we go through this huge licensing round, all of these businesses obtain licenses, they start operations, and then the patient registry starts. So essentially what happens is there's 0 patients, businesses are already starting, and there's no market for any business to succeed. What we're seeing as a better approach is a pre-qualifying and pre-registration process where the physician makes the recommendation or attests that the patient has the condition, and then they enter into the registry, with no fee until cannabis is actually available. So once cannabis is available, then they can, pay their licensing fee, and then they can continue on. But what this allows is not that huge window where there's no market at all. So we make a lot of recommendations around that. In places like New York and in Maryland, physicians have to take a 4-hour training course, and then they're eligible to get into the physician registry. So the programs that we're seeing most successful are that all physicians are eligible to recommend cannabis or recommend that the individual has the condition. So we make a lot of recommendations around that. As far as the process goes as to licensing businesses, we find a merit-based selection process being the most effective and the less liable for the state. We also make recommendations that pharmacists be on site at a dispensary, just to ensure that there's a healthcare professional there and that there's less liability. And then the last recommendation is a state advisory board. In many states, the Department of Health will put together an advisory board, subset of individuals from physicians to business owners to anybody, really that makes the program a success. They then give peer-reviewed journals and scholarly articles to the Department of Health, and then conditions are added that way. So it's a continual evolution of conditions to actually make the market and patients that access easy. So what does a merit-based application process look like? Really what the state's asking is for businesses to give them an understanding of what their plans are. For instance, what the building and the facility and the structure looks like. So engineered stamped drawings from an architect to really show where the different rooms are, where the different security aspects are, is typically one of the things that are required. The second is record-keeping plans. For instance, how you're going to track your inventory, how are you going to stay compliant with all the rules and regulations. From there, SOPs, standard operating procedures, good manufacturing practices, quality assurance, and security plans. Essentially, the state wants to know, from a security standpoint, how are you going to protect cannabis? Does it belong in a safe every evening? How are you going to protect individuals or assailants that are armed from entering a dispensary or a cultivation center? So really all aspects of the business have to be thought out and then documented and then submitted. So again, like cultivation plans, manufacturing plans, delivery plans if that's part of the process, and then just your dispensary plans, how you're going to serve patients and qualify.